Hey folks, so this is Brenton Lengel, and I am here streaming with Kay Fellowz, who just, yeah, and Kay just got done moderating a debate between myself and Armin. How do you say his last name?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, between me and Armin, and I will get his last name out because it keeps slipping my mind. And I don't want to like mangle it. I will probably mangle it because I'm going to be streaming with him tomorrow. Armin Navabi. And we did a debate on if institutional white privilege exists, and I was really happy to find out that Kay was doing the moderation for this because you've been on Modern Day Debate before. So do you want to introduce yourself, give a little bit of your background for our respective audiences?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kay. I am a pro-life activist that has kind of branched off into politics. I've been a pro-life activist for about 7 years now, and that kind of mediated me going into politics. I label myself as a libertarian. I have a lot of libertarian-leaning views. I am very, very active on Twitter. I'm very active in the pro-life community, and I do YouTube a little bit on the side, trying to get more into it. But yeah, that's me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And for your fans or anybody who might not know me, my name is Brenton Lengel. I am the author of, among other things, Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, which has been published through Scout Comics, and the second issue is coming out. And yeah, I've worked as a playwright. I've had 7 plays produced in New York City, and I'm working on a novel with a pretty major up-and-coming, or the novel is major up-and-coming. The band is actually established, but a pretty major goth band. It's the Crew Shadows, and they beat out Madonna and Beyonce for the #1 dance hit in the world in 2005. So I'm really excited. The book deals with it's a fantasy novel, but it deals with a lot of like cool spiritual topics. And so, yeah, I talk about philosophy, religion, all the stuff that you're not supposed to talk about. And I am an anarchist. I had my radio show, and it's a classical anarchist, which is more on the left. But I had my radio show Insurrection with Brenton Lengel for a year before I put it on an indefinite hiatus so that I could focus on my writing career. And, lately been dipping my toe into YouTube and doing a lot of YouTube debates.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Kay, now you describe yourself as a libertarian, and that's really interesting because that's kind of where I started very conservative. Like I was on the right. I don't know how old you are. I'm 37, so and I keep being reminded that that's super old sometimes.
Oh my goodness, that is not old. I'm 25. I'll be 26 in November. You are not anywhere near old.
That's great. I actually just set it up so you could say that to me and make me feel better. But it's weird because like friends of mine who I thought were like my age, they're like, "Oh yeah, I remember Columbine. That happened when I was in the 5th grade." And I'm like, "Oh God." So yeah, I guess what I'll do is I'll share with you kind of my political journey, and you can kind of talk about where you're coming from. What's interesting is the libertarianism and the right libertarianism, because I started out kind of on the right. I feel like a lot of kids tend to be very conservative. I was 150% behind the Iraq War in high school because I thought, well, Saddam is a bad guy. Taking out a bad guy, A-okay, there'll be no problems with that. And then I got to college, and as it turned out, I didn't hate gay people, and there was like a big anti-gay campaign, and so I just started to identify as a libertarian, and I stayed that for a number of years before I then moved on to classical anarchism and kind of where I am now. But why don't you tell me sort of what's your journey? Where did you come from? How did you develop the political beliefs that you have?
I think it's funny because I think we started out in a very, very similar place. I grew up in a very, very Christian conservative household. And so my social beliefs, my political beliefs were all kind of told to me. I didn't really have my own. They were all just kind of established by what my parents believed and what the church taught and what I was taught in my Christian school and so on and so forth. And then last few years of high school into college, I went through my rebellion stage. And politics wasn't really a big thing for people my age back then. It hadn't become like the fad that it is now for younger people to be involved in politics. So it was more social issues, particularly abortion. All of my friends were pro-choice, so I started labeling myself as pro-choice because my parents had always told me that I was pro-life. So I was like, okay, well now I'm pro-choice now because everything that my parents think is wrong. And then I went through a pregnancy scare right before I got to my first year of college. And it was kind of like my lean into pro-life activism. And the first few years that I was in pro-life activism, I was still very traditionally Republican, conservative, like cookie cutter, exactly what you would think a pro-life activist would be. And I was in that kind of rut for a number of years. And as I got more involved in my pro-life activism and seeing these different, more left-leaning and libertarian-leaning pro-life activists come up, and their message was just so inspiring, and I realized that how they were doing things was better than how we had been doing things, and that caused me to kind of research a little bit more in my political views. And as I started to research and kind of think for myself, I saw a lot of pushback from people on the right, my conservative group of people that saw me kind of going against the think tank. And I pushed, the more irritated they started to become with me. And that kind of started to send off red flags. And so I kind of took a step back from all of it, all of my activism, and kind of just started to research for myself. And slowly coming back into it, I realized that I had a lot more independent views. I was kind of really disenchanted with right-wing politics. And just gradually over the last 2 years, really, I've just been starting to kind of educate myself more on libertarian views and where libertarians stand on things. And like, yeah, that really makes sense. And my social leanings on things has, like, on a political compass, I'm actually pretty left-leaning. In views. The only thing that really keeps me right is the fact that I am a pro-life activist.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and that kind of surprises me. Not that not that you're pro-life versus pro-choice is a really heavily charged issue, and there's a lot of things that go into it. I know that most libertarians, like, you're kind of in the minority for libertarians, because a lot of them seem to be at least on the pro-choice end. So how is it that you encountered? Again, no judgment there. I'm just wondering, like, how is it that you encountered like pro-life libertarians, and how do they differ from your standard, get the government out of everything type libertarians?
The way that, like, I've always viewed it, and I actually, whenever I started looking into libertarianism, I did get a lot of pushback for the fact that I was pro-life. It took me a while to find other libertarians that were also pro-life. The way I always viewed it was, as libertarians, we think that the government should be very, very limited to what its sole purpose is, and that is protecting our rights. That's like the government's only purpose. And the way I look at it is, we don't have the right to life, then none of our other rights really matter. So I struggle with pro-choice libertarians thinking that that's not an issue, that, taking away some of these rights to life for the first 9 months that they exist should be, it's obviously abortion is an extreme violation of the NAP. And I know that's not like the heart and soul of libertarianism, but it's something that they believe very strongly in. And without the right to life, all of our other rights cease to exist. So I think that pro-life activism and libertarian ideology actually coexist very nicely together. I think it's just something that the LP as a party, as an organization, has refused to kind of dip its hands in for not wanting to ever take sides on anything that serious and such a hot button issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is. Now, and I should qualify, as an anarchist, and as a parent, and I think we're both parents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, I think we got kids like around the same age, because I have a kid. My son is 2. You have 2 kids, if I'm not mistaken?
I do. I have a son who's 3 and a daughter that's 2.
Oh, it's absolutely wonderful. Yeah. So, and the second, I think I saw on one of your channels, like, you'd gone through you had a preemie baby?
Yes, my daughter was 5 weeks early.
Yeah, my son Gavin, he was actually a preemie. He was, let me see, I think he was 4.5 weeks. So yeah, right around the same time. So I'm guessing you spent a lot of time in the NICU, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, actually, she was really lucky. Her lungs had developed enough to where she didn't have to go into the NICU. They kept me 2 extra days in the hospital. But then they let me go home. They were really concerned about, because I was on fluids forever. So she came out like full of water and then lost like 7 ounces in weight. So they were really worried about her at first, but she actually managed to be able to sustain herself long enough to be able to go home. Had a lot of soft spots in her head that we had to be super, super careful with for a long time until they healed up. But we were super, super blessed because my midwives actually got my due date wrong and induced me 5 weeks early.
I heard something about that, yeah. And you're comfortable talking about this, right? Because I know there can be some trauma
I struggled with it for a while. I had some PTSD with it, but like, we worked through it, and I'm able to, acknowledge the fact that we were incredibly lucky, and I'm incredibly blessed that it wasn't something incredibly serious and way worse than it. What it could have been would have been so much worse and horrifying to think about. But we were super, super blessed, and she's doing super well and didn't have any developmental delays or anything because of it.
Okay. Yeah, it's really happy to hear that. My son's doing really well as well. So, it's always shocking when, when you have a preemie. But yeah, I think you and I can really come together on that. And I'm really happy that things are going so well for you and your family. And, I'm sure your kids are a total handful, because I've only got, my mom would say like 1 is none and 2 is 10.
Yes. Yes. And I come from a huge family. My mom just had her 14th a few months ago.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, and my dad has 3, so I actually have 16 siblings in total.
That's a very big family.
Yes, it is.
Well, it must make holidays great because you get a ton of presents.
we name draw, so one person gets one other person, so we don't have to buy presents for everybody.
For 16 people, okay. I remember there was when I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, Maine to Georgia, there was a priest who was hiking with us, and he was like one of like 18 kids, if I remember. So I think he's the only one I've met that's beaten your family at this point. So, I mean, I should qualify. And, for anybody who's listening, this is a discussion, not a debate. I'm here talking to Kay in kind of a friendly manner. So I'm not going to be like grilling her. I don't think that that's polite. So if I've got any people in my audience who have a problem with that, go screw yourselves. Because I'm trying to have a conversation with a human being here. So if I or she say anything that you disagree with, put it or you think I should disagree with, you put it in the comments. I'll deal with it later. But I don't believe in being very aggressive when I just talk to a person. So, but I should clarify, and this is just kind of going from my background here. So, I was pro-choice. I still am. But what I noticed was when I had my son, I had some thoughts about it back and forth, just because that's my son, and suddenly it becomes much more real to you. But my wife, oddly enough, she was very much, she was always pro-choice, but she's more pro-choice since she had Gavin, since she'd been through that experience. So I guess I wanted to sort of ask you, it sounds like you're coming from it from 2 positions. One, where you draw the line and define personhood, which I'm guessing is at conception for you?
Yes, yeah. I define personhood at the moment that life begins. I always argue that, we've used the kind of philosophical argument about what is a person, what is not, to strip the rights away from different groups of people throughout history, and it's never been to the benefit of society.
Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely makes sense, and dehumanizing people is something that we do very frequently. And it seems like, so you're coming at it from sort of a minarchist standpoint, where the state, to understand your argument, the time that the state is justified in intervening is to protect people, and you consider a fertilized embryo or to be a person from the moment of conception. Therefore, the state's job is to protect that life, which is a consistent argument. I can definitely see there's a lot of what's the word? I see a lot of validity to that particular point of view. So my question here is, and this gets into the reason I sort of brought up the Iraq War earlier is one of the things that I learned in college was I had a professor who was very much of the idea that should is a dangerous word. And every time we say about how things should be, we really have to take things into account. And of course, this went back to, oh, Saddam is a bad guy. He should be toppled. And then, so my question is, has it been difficult for you to reconcile, I guess, the idea of deploying state violence to force an unwilling woman to carry a baby all the way to term? Because that's always been like the major sticking point on my issue, whether depending upon how and where I define personhood, the bigger issue for me is, do you put a gun, theoretically, do you put a gun to someone's head and say, no, you will go through this pregnancy, you will deliver this child to term, or you will be put in jail and punished? How do you reconcile that? I guess that violation of a person's rights with, I guess, the ideal that you're trying to go for, which is to protect life at all stages.
Yeah, and honestly, this is like a journey that I really went through with my pro-life activism becoming more left-leaning. With this, it's actually a growing group within the pro-life movement. They call themselves consistent life ethic activists. And what you see with consistent life ethic activists is there's a lot more peace and love. It's taking that whole love them both stance that the pro-life movement touts and really bringing it to fruition. The idea of walking a mother, a woman that is going through an unplanned pregnancy, all the way through her pregnancy, being by her side throughout it, helping her in every way that you can through all those stages, being a support for her after she has her baby, being a support for women that have born children and are struggling through life. That having that viewpoint coming into pro-life activism and opposing abortion really helps you reconcile the fact that these women, some of them really don't want to be in this. Nobody wants to be in a situation of going through an unplanned pregnancy. It's scary, even for women that want to have this child, that see this child as a life, that don't ever want to even consider abortion. Nobody wants to be in that situation. As a consistent life ethic activist, and I think that this has become more mainstream throughout all pro-life activism, we don't support the idea of women being imprisoned or anyway legally held responsible if they were to have an abortion after it was made illegal. I see no benefit to that. These women are in horrible, terrifying situation. I see a lot of these women as it's kind of like a fight or flight mechanism kicking in. They're scared, they don't know what else to do. Abortion is offered to them, so they take it. I think that whenever it comes to making abortion illegal, there's a lot more that goes into it socially that needs to happen, not before we make abortion legal. I think we should be having the fight of making abortion illegal, but we need to be putting a lot more effort into changing our culture and our society to be more accepting and helpful to women that are in these situations, so they don't have to consider abortion. That never gets to the point where the law has to step in and it's like, no, you can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a lot of sense, to tell you the truth. And I definitely agree with you on that, because, one of the things that and I think a lot of people who are on the other side of this issue seem to look at is, we look at the pro-life activists and we're like, you care about the baby when it's in the woman, but you don't seem to care about it once it's out of the woman. You don't care about its education. You don't care about its health care. You don't care about any of that. So it seems to me that a lot of times you'll see perhaps disingenuous arguments from so-called pro-life activists who are still pro-war, pro-death penalty, where what they're more interested in is keeping women in their place by controlling their reproductive, so that, as opposed to actually giving a crap about life and quality of life. And it seems like that's not where you're coming from, if I'm correct.
No, and thankfully that version of pro-life activism is kind of being pushed out. It's kind of an uphill battle. We do have we do have a long way to go, because there are whole organizations, there are well-known members in our community that, you know, whenever people think of pro-life activism, these big names pop up, and it's not good that our movement is associated with these people, because they do hold toxic opinions that pulls our movement back and pulls back all of the hard work that we put into it. You know, we take 2 steps and they say something stupid and pull us 3 steps back. But over the last few years, we have seen like just this huge growth in pro-life activists that see that kind of activism isn't working, that it may have worked for a little while back in, you know, the early 2000s, so on and so forth, but our culture has changed, and pro-life activism needs to change with the culture. And thankfully, we do see so many people taking up that banner and running with it, and like, this is what we stand for, this is what we're trying to accomplish, we don't want to do this to you, this is not what we're about, we care just as much about you and your needs and what you're going through as much as we care about the life that you are carrying inside of you.
That's, you know what, I gotta take my hat off to you, because that is consistent. So, you know, and it seems like if your movement is moving in an overall more positive direction, just the fact that we disagree, it's better to disagree with people who don't suck, you know, if I can say, than to, you know, wind up in a shouting match with somebody. And I actually, a few times in my past, I did a lot of activism with Occupy Wall Street, and I was protesting the Democratic National Convention, and I remember I got into a shouting match with 2 pro-life activists, like, in the street. One of them, total dick. But there was another guy, actually, that I talked to who seemed very genuine. I was a very aggressive atheist at this point, because I'd been suckered into the Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris New Atheist hole for a few years. But I was struck with this guy because he did seem to genuinely care. And he had adopted a number of kids, and like, there were times I thought there were things that he wasn't really thinking about or fully following through to its logical conclusion, but it seemed like he genuinely did care about stuff. So we at a few points, I remember, in the street, you know, when this very, very left-wing mob meets this very, very right-wing mob outside the Democratic National Convention, everybody's surrounded by cops. Like, it's nice to find some moments of humanity, like, within that. Now, you talked about, you know, being an activist. Has your activism been, like, purely online, or have you done street activism, or, you know?
Well, I've attended a few local, you know, kind of events. We had one a few years ago, whenever one of our local wonderful congressmen, he actually recorded himself or went live on his Twitter, like, harassing people outside of our local Planned Parenthood, like 2 teenage girls and like an elderly woman that was praying outside. So we had a big event outside that Planned Parenthood that I went to. I try to get to the March for Life every year in DC. It's one of my favorite things to go to. I love going. I like to do, before I had kids, I did it a lot more. It's really hard now, but I like to go and do sidewalk counseling outside the local Planned Parenthood and give, you know, pamphlets and, you know, there's a pregnancy center right across the street from the Planned Parenthood that's closest to me. So I like to try to, you know, redirect women, like, they'll help you, they'll get you free ultrasound, like, give them a bag full of, you know, stuff with like prenatal gummies and baby socks and onesies and stuff like that, like a little care package if they do decide that they don't want to go through with their abortion, making sure that they get the resources that they need. It's really hard to do that now because I can't in good conscience take my kids to do stuff like that, because it can turn violent, and it turns violent on a dime. Just the wrong person walks by and sees what you're doing, and then you have to call the police. So I can't really get out as much as I used to, and it kind of makes me sad sometimes because I don't have anybody to watch my kids to go down to the local Planned Parenthood. But I do a lot of my activism online now, just because that's, you know, it's right there at my fingertips. I can do it with, you know, my child sitting in my lap.
Yeah, and you can't catch COVID from the computer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me because I was really, really active, like, throughout Occupy Wall Street. Like, sort of my journey is, so I was a right-wing libertarian in college. And I sort of immediately began to be disenchanted with capitalism as soon as I got a job. Like, it was almost. Did you ever watch that show Gilmore Girls?
Yes.
Okay, you know the episode of Gilmore Girls where like freaking Paris has to get her a job for the first time and becomes like a hardline Marxist? that was pretty much me. Like,
Yeah.
I came into it, and you know, part of it was living in a small town that wasn't really well developed and didn't have a lot of economy. The area in Kentucky that I was in, and I had come from a very developed area of Northern Virginia, just a few, like 30, 45 minutes outside of DC. So I went from like very cosmopolitan to like there's one black person in the entire town. And I was like, man, you just get some freaking industry in here, people. So, you know, then college, then I worked in a job that was a good resume builder, but unfortunately was run by there were some very abusive policies there. I'm sure I was a bit of a jackass too, because, you know, I was a young guy who really was very excited to be a professional actor for the first time. And I had a lot of ideas. Some were good, some weren't good, and didn't get cast nearly as much as I would have liked. Then a dear friend of mine passed away in his sleep, like at 25, 5 days before I turned 25, and threw my world for a whole loop. And I realized after soul searching that I needed to hike the Appalachian Trail, Maine to Georgia, which had been a goal for my whole life. So, you know, I'd done like the first 600 miles right before I graduated college. I walked from Gatlinburg, Tennessee to Waynesboro, Virginia. And then I told my job I was going on a sabbatical and they could bring me back because your friend dies. What, are you going to go do a musical? You know? Would have been a fun musical. It was Forbidden Planet. But so I had my dad drop me off in Waynesboro. Or actually, I think both my dad and my mom went that time. So my mom, don't get mad at me for leaving you out of the story. And I walked north every day for the May to August and summited Katahdin. Went back, started as John Proctor in a local production of The Crucible, which was amazing because my town still believes in witches. So, yeah, it was like that town. There's some wonderful people there. That just all you need to know is they cut Oklahoma for content in like 2006. A 1950 play was cut for content. And then I did the final I walked from, did a little bit of an overlap, but I walked from Hot Springs, North Carolina, which is my favorite trail town. I even did my honeymoon there with my wife, down to Springer Mountain and finished the whole thing in 2008. That was the year Barack Obama was elected. And I remember because I hiked Blood Mountain on Halloween in a evil Obama costume because there was the whole Manchurian Candidate line about him coming out. So, yeah, I mean, I guess like living on the Appalachian Trail, that I didn't realize it at the time, but the way the thru hiker community functions, where you carry everything on your back, you brag about how little you have. If everything doesn't have like 2 uses, you get rid of it. And you sort of run on random acts of kindness from strangers. And most of the time you're like freaking 20 miles in the woods. There's no law, there's no police, and we all take care of each other. And in fact, the most dangerous parts of the trail, when you get back to, you know, civilization. So that sort of set the seeds for me to begin to explore classical anarchism. Now, my question is, you have probably encountered anarcho-capitalism if you're running in the right libertarian circles, and you're mentioning stuff like the NAP, because it's like a big ANCAP thing. So, I mean, have you talked to any of those people, or like, do you have any knowledge of it, or is this just something that's been on your periphery?
Just like on the periphery, like I see them like in passing, but haven't really delved into that yet.
Are they wearing bow ties?
Yes.
Yeah. Guys are so lame. Yeah, it's I got involved in the online anarchist scene through my radio show years ago because some ANCAP activists tried to steal anarchist memes, like the biggest anarchist, one of the bigger kind of more normie anarchist Facebook pages. Like they were mad about being excluded. So they mass reported it, got it taken down, then made their own anarchist memes that looked just like it, and were hoping to get like the 100,000 followers or whatever that they had at the time. Yeah, it was really dumb. But that sort of, and since then I've been like active in a number of like political Facebook debate groups and stuff, and that's how I started really doing the debating. Now, you debated freaking Destiny. Had you done debates before that? Because like Destiny's a tough guy to go up against. I haven't debated him yet, but he's good.
Honestly, it was so funny because I used to, whenever I first started with pro-life activism, I ran a pro-life Instagram page, and that debating kind of comes with the territory. You always have people in your comment section. You're always having to defend your position. But as far as like person-to-person debates or online debates, like video debates, I had never done anything like that before.
Wow.
I had never heard of Destiny before. I actually had one of my followers that's a good friend of the James, the modern day debate moderator. They're really good friends. He watches all of his debates. James was looking for someone to debate Destiny on the coronavirus lockdowns, and Steven gave him my information, and I hadn't even responded to Steven about whether or not I wanted to do it before I was put into a group chat with James, and he had already scheduled the debate.
Oh, jeez.
I had never heard of Destiny before. It was during whenever all the riots had started happening, and I'm in Philly. And my husband works rotating shift, and he was on night shift at the time, and he didn't want me staying home alone with my kids. So I had to pack up all of my studio equipment. I was at my mom's house. I had to put all my studio equipment up for this debate. I had like an hour before my debate. I was like binge watching Destiny streams, trying to figure out who this guy was.
Yeah. And I haven't had the chance to talk to him. He would be one of the debaters that would be more like my friend Caleb Maupin went up against him and actually did pretty well, which I was excited to see. I felt he did well. Destiny's fans felt Destiny won. Whoa, what a surprise! But yeah, I've learned it's probably best not to any of the just don't take any commenter's opinion seriously.
Yeah, and honestly, like. I enjoyed the debate. I felt kind of bad because I think everybody like was super hyped up, because Destiny is so well known. They were kind of expecting it to be like more of a shit show than it was. We actually ended up agreeing on a lot of things. The only thing that we really disagreed on was we did get into pro-life activism, but he didn't give as much as like his audience thought that he would, and I think we both kind of walked away with like something to think about more than like who won or who lost type of thing. I think a lot of people were actually kind of disappointed.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people watch debates. Debates essentially are performance art. And people watch them because they want to see the emotions. They don't really, I mean, some people like the special ones, the nerds, me, we'll watch them because we really enjoy arguments and stuff. But also, there's something to be said for watching somebody dunk on one's perceived political enemies. There's a catharsis in that I think the majority of the audience is kind of looking for. So I can see why people might have been more disappointed.
I felt kind of bad. I was like, I didn't give them the show that they wanted. But I always kind of had the opinion that like, if I were ever to debate someone, that I wanted it to be like for educational purposes. Like I'm being given this platform, I want to educate as many people as possible about the subject, like the content that we're talking about. And so like, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there are a few people that if I were ever to debate them, it would really just be me dunking on them just for
it happens. There's a few opponents I've had where I've had to be less than gracious. I was surprised because I debated Sargon of Akkad on trans women in sports, and Sargon has such a bad reputation in debates. Like one, he's not held to be a very strong debater, but two, he kind of tends to be very pig-headed and bullish about his ideas. in my debate, we actually kind of connected a lot of times. Like, I mean, it didn't solve anything because, he then went on to attack Lindsay Ellis over trans issues immediately after and didn't seem to have learned anything from the conversation, though I haven't watched the whole streams. But, there were a couple times I felt like we connected as people, and that is like so rare in today's like hyper politically charged landscape, especially. I don't know if it's like this kind of on the right, but you did mention pushback when you were moving in a more libertarian direction. Like there's the on the far left, and when I talk about the far left, I'm talking about not the Democrats, but like anarchists, Marxists, and other forms of non-Marxist socialists. So essentially, you've got kind of the DSA Bernie crowd. You've got anarchist street activists. And intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, and then you've got people like the tankies. You got people like Caleb Maupin, Zizek. I don't know, he's not really a tanky, but he tells people he's one, and he's kind of in that more authoritarian Marxist tradition. So the left has a tendency of engaging in kind of purity spirals where one of our own will get wounded or reveal a bad take, and then everyone will swarm them and they'll get canceled, and then everybody's like, why is the right out competing us on social media? It's like, because you keep destroying everyone who's not perfect, you assholes.
It's so funny because there's a stream that I go on regularly. It's called the Tomfoolery Podcast on YouTube. We stream. He's actually quarantined with COVID right now, so we've been streaming like every night for the last week. We talk about this regularly because he's also kind of like more drifting from the right, just really disenchanted with right-wing politics. And we've had this conversation multiple times about how this is a problem on the right because they never cancel people over their bad ideas. Like, people on the right can have the worst takes ever, and if you call them out on it, they will always have these like undyingly faithful simps that come and just murder you in your comments because you dared to call out this person for having a bad opinion.
Yeah, if it's so weird, and I think activism in general, it puts people into, there's kind of two ways you can go with it, because there's and I'm going to see if you have a relevant, like if we can kind of come together on this, if you have had similar experiences. But there's a lot of huge egos involved in activism. You have to have a bit of an ego because to tell everybody, hey, you're doing everything wrong, do what I want you to do. And it seems to be that activists will go one of two ways. They'll kind of mature and open up a little bit, or they'll do the opposite and they'll like hyper focus on something to where there's a famous guy at like Occupy, like I think his name was like John the Communist or something, and he'd always show up with his with his like Chinese communist flag, and he had a party of one, and would and I don't know if this is the same guy, maybe conflating two people, but he would put out like pamphlets that were just him publishing it, attacking other activists. And I think one of my friends actually said to him at one point, it was like, John, like, you think maybe instead of attacking other people, you could try to find other people that feel like you do, and you'd have more than one person in your party. And he just like looked at them like they said they had three heads, and quoted some obscure Marxist passage. And they're just like, okay. So, it's people who use activism essentially to expand their world and to keep working and to keep things realistic. And then people who essentially kind of just descend into this sort of self-righteous bubble that can eventually end where they're the only one putting out their own newspaper and yelling at everyone else. I mean, is it similar to that on the right, or is that more of a left-wing thing?
The problem that the right has is more like they do have the conflated ego issue. And it does very often go that one of two ways where, it has like, you have a little bit of an ego boost because, people are looking to you for your opinion on things, and that's going to give you a little bit of an ego boost. You know, you're human. I don't think anybody should feel any kind of way or fault for that. But the problem that the right seems to have is the conflated egos turn into it becomes less about the ideas that are being pushed and more about just keeping yourself, you know, trending on Twitter, keeping yourself in the spotlight, making sure that you're still gaining followers, that you're still getting, you know, subs on YouTube, getting the views, getting the clicks. It's all about keeping your brand and less about making a difference. And those people, like, the right holds so hard onto them because people on the right that get these audiences, they get them because the right wanted them to have them for whatever reason. It's like having kind of a token activist. And people are gonna think that I'm just harping on her because I hate her. But Candace Owens is one of my favorite examples of this. You know, she's a young, Black, female Trump supporter. She has the audience that she has because the right wanted to have that token, like, yeah, but we have like this young Black woman that loves Trump. You see that a lot with right-wing politics, and the messaging always gets blurred. Like, it's just whatever she's putting out is what the narrative is, and it doesn't matter if the narrative is good or not, just as long as you have people clicking on her content, following her on social media, giving, I think she works with PragerU now, and giving them the attention that they want her to break in. That's all that really matters. And all of the activism and all the messaging and everything that's supposed to be being accomplished in activism just kind of falls to the wayside in wake of that.
Yeah, in wake of these figures with large cults of personality, just whatever they happen to be interested in at a given time. That's really, really interesting. Anyway, I have a quick question for you, and I apologize for running this a lot like an interview here because we just kind of agreed to talk and didn't really have much on it. I'm just used to interviewing people on my old radio show, so I just got scared and fell back into bad habits. I wanted to ask you really quickly. So as far as we've sort of talked about your sort of libertarian ethical views, my question is with you, how does capitalism fall into your libertarian outlook? Is because a lot of libertarians, you know, kind of are very market oriented. They're very, you know, the ANCAPs will tell you that they want to lecture you on economics for 6 hours. But you also just sort of describe yourself as more left leaning. And one of the major hallmarks, in my opinion, of the left is a criticism of capitalism. So like, you know, how do you fall on like the capitalist socialist spectrum, and like how does that work in with your libertarian and your pro-life beliefs?
I do consider myself pro-capitalist. I think that, you know, a lot of people, especially younger people that aren't super educated with economics, they don't realize that we haven't lived in a truly capitalist society in God knows how long. I think that there are benefits to capitalism. The way that I kind of conflate that with my libertarian views, as well as being left-leaning and also being pro-life and wanting, you know, society to help people, is I see that private charities are much more beneficial. You know, being a libertarian, I feel like the government does very, very few things well. You give the government an inch, they'll take a mile and they'll fuck that mile up so bad. You know, like you see things like welfare, whereas, you know, like only 1/3 of the funds that are going into the welfare system are actually going to people that need welfare. A lot of that, 2/3 of that money is being funneled back into the system, back into the pockets of the people that are running the system. Whereas private charities, you're seeing less than 1/3 of money that is donated to private charities being pocketed, and then more than 2/3 of it being circulated back to people that actually need it. And this kind of goes into my pro-life activism, where, you know, we need to change the culture to be more accepting to mothers that are in need. Well, we need to change the culture to be more of, you know, help your neighbor out, to be more charitable, look in on your friends, your family. You know, if you see, you know, a hungry person sitting on the street, buy them a meal. You know, we become a society that is so self-indulging and we don't care about people anymore. And, you know, a lot of people, whenever they look around at how broken our society is, they want the government to jump in and fix it. And whereas I'm kind of like, I don't trust the government to fix it. And I think that we could do a lot more if we just did activism on a social level and got, more people helping with charity work, opening up more soup kitchens, bringing back, brother-sister programs to inner cities, getting kids the help that they need, stopping the war on drugs and rather just helping kids stay away from drugs without the law getting involved, things like that. I think it's more beneficial to do it as a society instead of expecting a very, very broken system to be less broken.
That's oddly slightly left anarchist, actually, in a way. So cool. So now I don't know if you have had occasion to talk to too many people like on the left or have experience on the left. For the record, I don't consider myself on the left, but that's not because I disagree with the left. It's more I don't like team mentality worming its way into my brain and getting me to think or say things that I might otherwise not believe. So I usually just identify as an anarchist, and I'm like just going to leave it at that. But I do, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to agree with the left on an issue. And the closest thing you could find to my political ideology is, I would say, anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, like coming out of like the Spanish tradition. Now, I don't know how much you've got with that, but, you got a fairly left-wing guy who's really experienced on the left right here. Do you have any questions for me about where I'm coming from?
Like, as far as, like, you call yourself, like, I guess whenever I think of communism, it's probably just because I've been so indoctrinated by right-wing activism. I see communism as extreme government, like extreme government involvement. So how does that conflate with also being an anarchist?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Okay, so this is going to need to be a little history here. So there have essentially been 2 major currents within the socialist movement. Like back during the Industrial Revolution, when there was all this child labor and people were losing hands and limbs in factories, and there was no 8-hour workday. There were no weekends. Just you worked for these capitalists or you died. A bunch of intellectuals in Europe got together to try to talk about the problem and see, what we could come up with as a possible way to solve it. Now, out of those, you had thinkers like Mikhail Bakunin, Peter Kropotkin, a very famous one. I don't know if she was actually at the First International, but Emma Goldman is one of my personal heroes, and she's awesome. The FBI tried to turn her into an informant on a train, and she threw a glass in the dude's face. You had essentially that camp, and then you also had who were very influenced by like the more radical ideas from the French Revolution, and then you had the Marxists who were influenced by the writings of Karl Marx and Engels. There was the first person to call himself an anarchist, or actually, I'm sorry, the first person to call himself a libertarian in the political sense was actually an anarcho-communist. His name was Joseph de Jacques, and one of the major founders was this guy by the name of Pierre-Joseph Proudhon. Proudhon and Marx were friends, but then they hated each other because they got into a fight over book publishing rights. As a result, there was this split that happened in the First International met. Then they came up with some ideas. Second International met years later. They came up with some more ideas. Third International went to meet, and what happened was that the anarchists called Marx's ideas authoritarian and would just lead to greater tyranny. And Marx said, you guys are a bunch of disorganized rabble. You're never going to actually be able to have a decent revolution. And the two split and wound up hating each other and literally killed each other down the line, unfortunately, when big mass political movements came in. But essentially, an anarcho-communist is somebody who... the first thing to understand is that communism is not what it is described as. Usually when people think communism, they think the USSR. They think a very heavily authoritarian form of Marxism that was taken from the writings of Marx and then adapted with the philosophy of Vladimir Lenin, and then made even more conservative and authoritarian by like freaking Stalin. So, and if you talk to some people like a post-leftist, they'll say like that form of like Marx-Leninism is a right-wing aberration of what the socialist movement was. Communism itself, like its actual definition and the actual ideal of communism, is a stateless, classless, moneyless society in which the goods and services, like in which the major industry is controlled by the workers who operate it and utilized not for the profit of individual investors, but for the society as a whole. So essentially, if you got to communism, there would be no state. There'd be no military, no formal military, no police, no real government. Everything would instead be being run democratically, and if you're talking to an anarcho-communist, very much on the local level. So we define communism much differently than the average American would. The sort of more government versus less government framing, that's a product of propaganda put out by the U.S. government during the, what's it called? During the Red Scare, essentially, and the Cold War, where they tried to do their best to contrast the United States' freedom with the USSR's despotism, and that's sort of what then led to like right-wing libertarianism. So that's sort of the history lesson on it. But essentially, like an anarcho-communist is someone who believes in engaging in direct action to abolish the state and the capitalist class in order to essentially spread the wealth among everyone and also to spread the power. A lot of it is about the idea that power corrupts, and if you concentrate too much power in too few hands, it's always bad. So I will tell people, like, if you imagine like a power vacuum, like what happened when we toppled Saddam and everything went freaking crazy. Society has traditionally filled this power vacuum with very large boulders, with kings, with presidents, with states. What I would recommend is, instead of using big, large boulders, you smash that into a million grains of sand. And that way we maximize the amount of positive and negative liberty for each individual, which is the ability to, one, not be oppressed, and to, two, do what you actually want to do. So the society becomes more free, but also because no individual can rise to ridiculously high heights of power, we stop the ability and the incentive for people to become tyrants. So ultimately, I think that's a quick primer on anarcho-communism. I hope I didn't, because there's a lot of background stuff that I skipped over. So is that making sense at all?
Absolutely, yeah. And I found it very educational. I'm kind of floored right now.
Awesome. Thank you. The internet works. Yeah. I mean, if you're interested in the subject, what I would recommend is looking up. So I got very interested in this both because of the Appalachian Trail and also because I wanted to write a play and then a movie about the Spanish Civil War. And I wound up, let me show you. This is just a gargoyle. It has nothing to do with what I was talking about. I wrote a movie about Buenaventura Durruti, this figure, who is sort of like the anarchist Che Guevara. And in Spain, what happened in the 1930s was when Spain's military went fascist and tried to take over the whole country, Buenaventura Durruti and the other Spanish anarchists with the CNT-FI took up the defense of the city of Barcelona. And they fought the fascists and beat them. Like, one of the only times that a civilian force with antique weapons and like homemade bombs beat a modern mechanized army. They collectivized the entire city, ran it on a libertarian socialist model for like 3 years. And Durruti then went to go fight Franco in Madrid. He won his first battle and then was tragically killed, either, depending upon who you ask, either by a misfiring gun, a Bolshevik assassin, or a fascist sniper. We don't really know, but he was like, it's one of my personal heroes. A wonderful guy. Started out as a union member and a bank robber, and just a person who devoted his entire life to freedom and to freeing others. So yeah, I was learning about that, and I think just partially between that, and I was also in New York City, and you're seeing the huge buildings and the institutions, and rent is through the roof. And I saw this graph, I remember, and it was like the wealth distribution in the United States, and it was like, this is what Americans think it is. This is what Americans would like it to be. This is what it really is. Like, just the obscene amount of wealth that the 1% has just kind of broke my brain. And I sort of just threw my hands up in the air reading this, and I was just like, fuck it. Property is theft. I guess I'm an anarchist. And I showed up to like Occupy Wall Street with like a big black and red sign said class warfare, bring it. It was on CNN. And I kind of, the rest is history from there. So yeah, the Spanish anarchists are fascinating. And there's also been a long history of that. There were anarchists in the Ukraine under the command of Nestor Makhno, a brilliant military leader. And he sort of fought for the peasants during the Russian Revolution between the whites and the reds, and actually entered into an alliance with the Red Army, defeated the last of the White Army, and then was immediately betrayed by the Red Army. His generals were taken and killed, and he had to flee to France, where he later died of tuberculosis. He's in my movie as well, by the way. I really hope this thing gets made one day. But yeah, so I mean, but even there's you might have heard of them, the Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico. There's a great documentary called The Take by Naomi Klein about anarchists running factories and the recovered factories movement in Argentina. And the most recent would be like the I hope they're still around because Trump betrayed them. But in Rojava, the PKK YPG were some of the best fighters against ISIS, and they were anarchists following a specific anarchist thinker called Murray Bookchin. So, it's a small school of socialist thought, but it's been getting bigger and bigger in the age of the internet. And I think because it makes more sense the way that we organize. So yeah, I mean, that's anarchism, like as its history, and that's sort of kind of where my values are and where they come from. Do you have any other questions for the leftist cuck?
Not at the moment, but I might down the road. Yeah.
Well, it's a lot, and it can overwhelm people, so I try to keep it buttoned down. So here's my question. Since we've done all this politics and we talk about all this stuff, why don't we just, piss everybody off and do religion?
We have to do it.
Yeah. So what's your religious background? What's your sect? How has it changed since you were a kid? Where do you go to church, essentially?
Oh, this is probably going to lose me a lot of followers on Twitter.
That's my goal. No, I don't. Don't leave us. Yeah.
I grew up in a Christian household. It was funny because whenever my mom and my biological father were married, I have vague memories of being like a small child and going to church every once in a while. After they divorced, my dad's active duty military, so we were living in North Carolina at the time. After they divorced and she met my stepdad, and they got married and we moved up here, we went to a Presbyterian church for a number of years. It was just kind of, very watered down Christianity. Mm-hmm. And then we moved. Yeah,
they're Scots. They're very even keel.
We moved whenever I was about 10, and we started going to a very fundamental Baptist church. And my entire life changed. What I was allowed to watch, what I was allowed to listen to, how I was allowed to dress, where I was allowed to go, and that's how we lived. I was 10 and I left home at 19. Very legalistic view of this is what the Bible says. Honestly, not a good experience, especially being a woman growing up in that environment. After I met my husband, I was kicked out of my house because of being physically involved with my husband. My husband had a very similar background. He grew up in a Baptist church. We didn't go to church really whenever we were engaged, first few years of being married. we kind of have always talked about wanting to have that background for our kids, you know, having that supportive moral backbone to kind of guide them, but we didn't really want them to have the environment that we grew up in where, you know, we're in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, your whole life kind of revolved around what the church thought, what the church taught, and so on and so forth.
There was a, if I can interrupt really quickly, there was a comic book that I was going to write, I may still write, called Mecha Church, about a mega church that transforms into a giant robot. And there was like a, because of that tradition that I saw a lot in, because in the part of Kentucky that I was in, it sounds like a lot of the similar people, where they're going to church on Wednesday nights and Sunday, and it's like, you know, it's kind of almost like the Jesus in the evening, Jesus at supper time when Jesus. So I was going to do a joke in it where, like, basically he just set it up so you never left church. You were always in church. There were beds there. It was a Walmart.
Like, kind of what it felt like sometimes, but you know, having a really, really bad experiences after I left that environment, I had a lot of anger towards the church. I never wanted to go back. I didn't, especially after I had my daughter. I was really big on, like, we're not sending them to a Christian school. We're not putting them in church. I don't want her to have to go through what I went through as a woman growing up in that environment. It took a number of years for me to kind of heal from that, and really in the last like year or so, and I can actually equate this to kind of the shift in my political and social activism, just of having such negative experiences with religious people in those areas of my life. I kind of came to a conclusion where I was like, I don't really know if I believe any of this anymore. Like, so I, you know, whenever people ask me like where I stand religiously, I'm like, you know, I'm kind of like exploring, you know, what I believe and what I don't believe anymore, because I've had religion and what I, you know, my whole view of what religion is and what life is kind of forced down my throat my entire life. I've never explored anything else.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. I really identify with a lot of stuff there. Yeah, I wasn't really raised super religious. Actually, my mother raised me to be a little heathen. She was a Quaker who converted to Catholicism for my father. My father's side of the family was the type of Catholics that were like, you don't go to church every single Sunday of your life, you will go to hell. And that led to a lot of estrangement, you know, between, you know, my father and his parents, and a lot of stress with them and her. But I remember, like, my mom reading me Bible stories as a kid. She read me the story of Abraham and Isaac, and then just stopped and was like, that is a terrible way to test someone. Like, she was super mad about that. And as a parent now, I understand. I'm like, oh yeah, that's messed up. So, like, I was kind of raised to be a little heathen. I identified as a Buddhist in high school, mainly to troll Christians in the tiny town, because, like, literally this was like the second question out of everyone's mouth after, like, what's your name is, you've been saved. And yeah, so, like, I did that for a while, and kind of was sort of vaguely Christian, vaguely Buddhist, and then I moved to New York City. And in New York City, I had a moment where I totally lost my faith. It was a number of things coming together. I think part of it was the environment that was so threatening, because it's just such a massive city. And, like, I love New York. I really do. But it's so expensive. And because New Yorkers, because we've got so much constant sensation overload, we get very tunnel visioned. And it's like the joke would be like, you know, there's a guy standing next to me naked holding a severed head. And I'm just like, that is not my head. That is not my blood. That is not my business. So, like, you know, there's a lot of fear involved in that, and a lot of frustration, a lot of ideas. I needed to drop childish things. And I realized, with the idea of an eternal hell for not believing in Jesus, and just like the idea of, like, if your kid came up to you and is like, I don't believe in you, are you going to freak out and, like, slap him and throw him in a closet forever? No, that's not how a parent behaves. That's not how a loving individual behaves. And so, like, my brain was just like, oh, holy crap, God's not real. Click. And suddenly there were all these new like lines of thought to go down, and I was so excited. And I read, I named my cat after Christopher Hitchens. Luckily, Hitchens has outlived both his namesake. Well, that's awful that he passed, but also my like new atheist phase. So I spent a while being very aggressively anti-faith. I would argue with street preachers. And then in like 2014, my faith came back. And it was more of a feeling than anything else. And I suddenly realized I had faith and I didn't know what to do with it. And I was like, you know, I don't think I'm ever going to be a Christian again. So there was a guy at my workplace who I heard was a Buddhist. And I'm like, I kind of want to be a Buddhist now. I want to actually take it seriously. Help? How do I do this? And he took me to Soka Gakkai. And we are the largest lay Buddhist organization in the world. We're 192 countries, do a lot of great work with the UN, and we chant the title of the Lotus Sutra, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That's why I said it at the beginning of the debate. It's part of our practice, and oh, here, hang on, it's my liturgy for when I chant. And since then, for a while I was worried I'd joined a cult. Turned out I didn't, thank God. Mainly I would say since then I became a men's leader in Harlem. I've aged out of the young men's division, and now I'm a father, and I've been focusing much more on my family. But it gradually became something that was much more important to me than I thought it would be. And it's sort of part of the reason why I do a lot of the debates and why I started doing the YouTube channel again. So that's kind of where I landed. I'm enjoying being a Buddhist. It's really helped with my depression, anxiety, and general pessimism about the state of the world.
It's funny because, I've told a few people that I'm kind of I feel like I'm really over organized religion. I feel like it gets so easily corrupted and twisted. And I have a friend that has been I've never met her in person. She used to follow me all those years ago whenever I ran my pro-life Instagram page. She actually went through a pregnancy scare at 15 and was super, super worried. And I talked her out of, if she was pregnant, that I would get her the resource, talked her out of going to her local Planned Parenthood. And she's followed me ever since. And after I started kind of drifting a little bit from conservatism, my mom actually had just recently it's whenever essential oils had become super, super big.
Oh.
She was trying so hard to get me into them. And I was like, Mom, it's like a multi-level marketing scam. She's like, no, it actually they really work and blah, 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 blah. And so that was the beginning of my fall into the rabbit hole of being kind of a naturopath. And then, it kind of all balanced out because I was engaged to my husband, who is a pothead, and got me
I
into
approve.
So it was kind of I really started exploring, natural remedies and getting more in tune with, living plants in the earth and everything. And I lost hundreds, almost 1,000 followers on my Instagram page because I started putting out posts about using natural herbs during pregnancy to help with symptoms and stuff like that. And people started accusing me of witchcraft, and all these conservatives are accusing me of witchcraft. Well, she is now a Wiccan, and she's trying so hard to get me to invest time in her Wiccan stuff now that I'm exploring different religions.
That's hilarious. Yeah, well, what's so funny about that, because my brain went in a completely opposite direction. You lost followers because they said you were doing witchcraft with the essential oils. I was thinking because I know that there's this whole thing called free birthing. It's like having birth at home without even a midwife. And
I wanted so bad to do that, but I was scared.
It's a good thing that you didn't, because it unfortunately resulted in a lot of dead babies. But Yeah, I was thinking people were mad at you for that because they're like, oh, using natural stuff instead of Western medicine on the pregnancy. People get very intense about, for good reason, I suppose, about that kind of thing. But yeah. So I'm glad you had the midwife, though.
Yeah, I went to a birth center, and like I was actually kind of bummed out because I chose a birth center because I have an anxiety disorder, and the idea of giving birth in a hospital, like my mom had, at the time that I had my first baby, she had done it 13 times, 12 times. And like the anxiety, people coming in and out, you're hooked up to all these machines. Like just the idea of it made me really, really anxious. And at a birthing center, you have your one midwife and maybe a support. You give birth in like a kind of bedroom setting. And unfortunately, with both of my pregnancies, my amniotic fluid started leaking, and I had to give birth in the hospital both times.
Oh. Well, I mean, like with my wife, I remember she has Crohn's disease, which is one of the reasons I've done a lot of activism, actually, because it's terrifying thinking that we might not have health care at times, because she can't go without it for like even a week. So like, I remember she was high risk pregnancy and she went in for a non-stress test, and then they're like, hey, you better come down to the hospital. And I remember getting out of bed and I'm like, I am not having a baby today. And then I had to do an emergency C-section.
Yep. The minute that thought crossed your brain, it's like, yeah, I'm having a baby today.
Yeah. Well, this is really cool. Honestly, I could talk to you for another 3 hours because you're really interesting. And you were, judging by some of the comments, you were the most popular part of my debate with...
I'm building my simp army.
Yeah. What, and by the way, I don't know if you listened to the debate afterwards, but me and Armin were talking about your haircut because it's wonderful. And I came out of kind of the goth scene, so that's almost, to me, like it's almost an industrial haircut. Is that what you were going for with it, or?
Honestly, like whenever it's been growing out slowly. Like I keep cutting it. I had, right after my daughter was born, I had my hair, it was past, like it was to the middle of my back, and my hair is super, super thick. So I had all of this hair, and my son stuck gum in my hair right.
Oh, jeez.
So I went to the salon. I was like, I had a pixie cut before. I was like, just cut it all off. Just cut it all off. And my husband, it's so funny. Although we've kind of branched out a little bit in his opinion, he's very, very traditional in his opinions. And so like I have, short hair, it's bleached out. It's been every color of the rainbow. I'm waiting for it to grow out to my chin, and I'm going to part it down the middle, and one side's going to be purple and one side's going to be teal.
That's freaking cool. Yeah.
And he's horrified.
What, really? Hey, don't be horrified. That's awesome. People, yeah. My wife does a ton of colored hair. She has a pixie cut. I personally, I prefer it on women. So yeah, I'm officially slapping your husband on the wrist, saying, "Do what you want to do."
I'm working on him. He's getting.
One of the best experiences I think my wife had with her dyed hair in New York was she would be walking down the street. She two things happened when she cut her hair short and dyed it. One, men stopped harassing her on the streets, which was great. But two, kids and old black ladies absolutely loved her hair.
I know. You feel crazy for it. They absolutely love it. It's so funny. I had pink hair. It was like a really, really soft, subtle pink. Mm-hmm. Everywhere I went, little girls were coming up to me asking me if I was a mermaid.
That's so cool. Yeah, I remember there was one little girl that was getting pulled into her apartment building, and she just looked and saw my wife and was just like, purple hair.
My favorite thing about it is like, even with how like our society has progressed, everybody has like those stereotypes in the back of their head. Whenever it comes to colored hair, everybody, especially people on the right, automatically assume things about you. And I love going out with my hair dyed a funky color, especially now with COVID, because my mask, I had it custom made. It says, It's got a patch on the side of it, and it says pro-life feminist on it. So I walk in, I have funky colored hair with my mask on, and I have a jean jacket with pro-life pins and patches all over it with my 2 kids, and people just stare. Like, I've actually walked to the grocery store and watched people go. I just smile and I wave.
We should, at some point, we should talk about feminism. I think I've kept you long enough, so we should maybe do another stream. Do you want to do a stream where we talk about feminism?
I would love to talk about feminism because I get so much shit for being, like, labeling myself a feminist. You get shit from the right, you get shit from the left. Like, everybody hates the fact that I call myself a feminist.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, and I also call myself a feminist, and I get shit from the right and shit from the left on the whole thing. So, yeah, screw you guys, you're all jerks. But okay, great. So, but I think I've kept you long enough, and this has been a lot of fun. I suppose do you want to plug your pluggables? Where can people find you?
Probably the best place to find me. I am always active on Twitter. Even if I die, my ghost will be tweeting on my Twitter profile. It'll just never die. They can't get rid of me.
Yeah, and your Twitter profile is, for the audience?
It's at Kay Fellowz with a Z. So KayFellowz.
Awesome.
And actually, I'm on all my social platforms with that name. So my YouTube is Kay Fellowz with a Z, and it's the same handle on my Instagram.
Great. And if anybody wants to find out more about me or follow me on more platforms, you just Google my name, Brenton Lengel, Lengel, and it's Brenton, not Brendan. And I'm literally the only one in the world, so you'll find me pretty easily. What you can also do at Brenton Lengel on Twitter, and you can also follow at Snow White Bones for the Snow White zombie comic book series. We've got our 2nd issue coming out very soon. I'm still dealing with Scout and some production problems, but I'm really excited with where things are going. And we can talk about that and feminism. How about? Because that's actually the first play version of that comic series premiered in the Estrogenius Festival, a celebration of female voices in New York in 2010. So this has been wonderful, and thanks so much for the great job you did moderating the debate. And I assume you're going to continue to do work with Modern Day Debate?
Yeah, honestly, I did. I'm glad that you thought that I did a good job, because I came away from that. I was like, that was horrible. I had no idea what I was doing.
No. You were fine. You read the questions, and honestly, like the mods don't usually do much on Modern Day Debate,
yeah,
which isn't usually a problem.
Just kind of like let it go.
Awesome. And we'll talk more about feminism, more like left-right issues. This is a lot of fun, and I'll put this out on my YouTube channel, and if you want to stream it, by all means do. But I guess I will catch you guys. So this is Kay Fellowz and Brenton Lengel signing